Hello everyone, it's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire in the Head Productions. So today's video is about Savage Kingdoms. So I did a video about, I guess it's been about 2 weeks now. I covered magic and sorcery and the upcoming edition, a new edition of Savage Kingdoms. So it'll be the 4th edition, or whatever I decide to call it, but it is technically the 4th, or really the 3.5th edition, but whatever, a new edition. And yeah, so the last video I went over magic and sorcery, kind of an overarching thing about how it's going to work in the game system, what's changed, what's still the same. Most of it's still the same from previous editions. This edition we're all about just kind of tightening things up and new ideas that have come to me over the last few years based on player feedback and just my own observations. So anyway, I just thought I'd do a somewhat quick video today, specializing in some of the magic and sorcery. So since that's a very broad topic, I wanted to kind of break it down to a smaller topic, and that is spellcasting. Because when you say magic and sorcery, automatically most people think spellcasting, but really that's a really broad arcing thing that includes mystical abilities of supernatural creatures and things like that. So this one is just about spellcasting and how it works in general. And it hasn't changed a whole lot either, but I would like to point out some things that have been cleaned up in this new edition, which is currently in playtesting phase right now. So, all right, so first of all, what is spellcasting, right? So I guess that's an obvious thing. That is obviously casting a magical effect, producing a magical effect through an incantation, and a gesture, tracing runes in the air, or certain gestures that formulate magic effects. I don't know what that was about. You just need one free hand, kind of like in D&D. I think it does it the same kind of way. And you need to be able to speak. However, in Savage Kingdoms, the lovely thing about the system, you can try to cast a spell without speaking, which is great. But you just have -4 to your magical arts die roll, which I'll get to in a second. So there's a -4 penalty, so a 20% less chance of success, essentially. And you can also do a spell without gestures. Say if you were completely armed, had a long sword or some kind of weapon out and a shield or whatever, both your hands are occupied, you could still cast a spell by just speaking it without doing the gestures. And that's also a -4 penalty. You can also try to cast a spell without any of that. So just by sheer force of will. And that would be at -8, because -4 and -4 are cumulative to a -8 penalty. I've said in previous videos, the new Savage Kingdoms is very modular on -2s, -4s, -6s. So there's very few things like -1, +1. There's still a few, but for the most part, the penalties and bonuses are +2, +4. Easier math. It's just more intuitive in the head. So that's kind of been cleared up a little bit. Not a super big deal, but I think it's been very helpful so far. So yeah, you can cast a spell. Now there are certain talents that allow you to not suffer a -4 penalty for not being able to have a free hand to make gestures with, and that is I think it's called motionless invocation. And there's another one called wordless invocation. I forgot what I call it, but anyway, that one allows you to cast a spell without an incantation, speaking words. In other words, speaking a verbal component. Allows you to do it without the -4 penalty. Anybody can try to do it, but those talents alleviate that. So as you can see, you could be a pretty powerful spellcaster if you can get some of these talents and not only become better at the spells, your bonuses are getting higher. So you can really kind of complete this really cool sorcerer wizard kind of package, if that's what you're going for with your character, by fulfilling some of these cool game mechanics. All right, so how does spellcasting work? Spellcasting, just like combat, just like crafting something, just like perceiving something, just like trying to persuade an NPC or something, it all runs off of the D20 skill system. So when I created Savage Kingdoms, I was very adamant about having a very unified, and I know this is a thing, almost all games now have this, are pretty big into a unified system, but early forms of D&D were kind of cobbled together with a lot of subsystems, and it's not Dungeons and Dragons' fault. It was like the first one, right? So it was still trying to figure itself out. But even through second edition, you had like Some things were using D6s, and some things were using D20s, and some things were high roll. And then when the non-weapon proficiencies came in second edition, that was like low roll because you had to roll under your ability score. It was cool for a while, but it got really kind of confusing, especially for new players. So my quest, and a lot of other game designers' quest since then, was to make a more unified system. And Savage Kingdoms definitely is one of those. Everything runs off of a single roll of a D20. Everything is either a skill check for the most part. The reason I say for the most part, say if you are trying to punch someone, you would make a brawling skill roll. But if you have no skill levels in brawling, it's just straight physique. So you're making a physique roll. So in a sense, that's an attribute roll because that's what they're called, Savage Kingdoms. But anyway, it's the same thing. You can just say a skill roll and everybody knows what you're saying. Because even if you have +0 in brawling, you're still rolling against that skill, right? Even though you're not trained in it, it is still something that you're doing, right? All that to say that spellcasting is a magical arts skill roll. So there's the magical arts skill, but it's technically 7 different skills. So there are 7 disciplines of the magical arts in the Savage Kingdom setting and game system. That's air, earth, fire, water, life, death, and shadow. So there's the 4 elemental ones. I guess those are pretty obvious. And then you have those are kind of known as the elemental disciplines. And then you have what's kind of known as the spirit or force disciplines, and that is life, death, and shadow. So when you're building your character, when you advance and you get some cool skill points to spend, which everybody loves doing, by the way, which is really cool. It's kind of almost a throwback to like 3.5 D&D, but it's different. I wouldn't say it's totally different, but it's pretty different. But anyway, same general idea. So you can, if you want to put points into air magic, that's cool, but you could pick up a second discipline. It's very expensive. It's not impossible to know 2 disciplines or even 3 disciplines of the magical arts in the game, but it is somewhat difficult, and that's been made on purpose because in the magical arts, spellcasting is pretty powerful in Savage Kingdoms. Not to the degree of D&D. I did that on purpose. One of these days I'll make a video that maybe a deeper dive into like how I've kind of made spellcasting and combat, martial, as people always say, and other aspects of the game are all pretty even, actually. That was definitely a goal of mine. And magical arts being kind of rare, not necessarily amongst player characters, although it does tend to be somewhat more rare than like a spellcaster in D&D, but in the overarching world amongst NPCs and stuff, it's spellcaster is pretty rare. A wizard or a priest who's known spellcasting, a sorcerer, a witch, some of the callings that are kind of known, even alchemists, that might lend themselves to being spellcasters or students of the magical arts. So you have air, earth, fire, water, life, death, and shadow. Those are your 7 disciplines. So in order to learn the magical arts, so magical arts, going back just a little bit, magical arts is the only skill that requires a talent. So you can even alchemy. In fact, I almost several years ago in the earlier editions, I almost made alchemy a skill that you do have to have a talent to kind of get into. But since the DRs to do anything with alchemy are pretty high as they should be, even identifying elixirs and stuff is like fairly difficult. I figure the DR's difficulty rating is what I mean when I say DR. It used to be called DL in the previous editions of Savage Kingdoms, difficulty level. I just changed it to DR. I don't know why, really, just something different. And the term level kind of people that know me, because I've done this stuff for so long. The term level is so overused. I try to get away from it as much as possible. That's it's a weird little pet peeve. I think difficulty rating actually sounds better. It also ties in with defense rating. So anyway, because that's essentially a DR as well. So where was I? Oh yes. So magical arts is the only skill that you need a talent in order to be able to even attempt, right? So what I was getting at was even alchemy. You don't necessarily have to have an entry talent, or brawling, or range weaponry, or stealth, or sailing, or whatever it is. You can just try, right? But magical arts, you definitely have to have a entry talent, as I like to call it, and that's usually acolyte, apprentice. I might have mentioned this in the previous video. Apprentice. Magic Affinity is one. And there's one or two dabbling arcanist, which only means you know one spell. Period. You're just dabbled in it. Hence the name of the talent. And there might be one more. Anyway, there's like 5 talents, choices of talents that you can get. Another way to get qualified to use magical arts is to join an elite order, particularly one that does train people in one of the 7 or more disciplines of magical arts, such as a lot of the priestly orders, like the Druidic Order or the Priest of Agathon, or even the Truth Keepers of St. Palandir. But some of the more, to use kind of a D&D term, more of an arcane approach would be like the White Magi or the White Wizards of R. Is a very notable elite spellcasting order. The Circle of the Raven, Order of the Golden Crucible, stuff like that. So by joining one of those orders, which you have to have some prerequisites to get into, but they're not usually that difficult. You can get free training from. You can also get into one of the disciplines that way too. So there are different ways to be able to use the magical arts skill. Speaking of which, so let's assume that you can use the magical arts skill. You do have the appropriate talent or the appropriate membership into an order or whatever. So that's just a D20 roll, like all the other 27 skills. There's 28 total skills in the game. So yeah, you roll your D20. You're trying to hit a DR, a difficulty rating, like I just talked about. DRs are anywhere from 11 to 20. They're now like streamlined. This is another like attempt in the new game to make everything a little more streamlined. It kind of feeds off each other better, and it's kind of modular. I think previous editions did okay, but I think this one's going to do better. That's one of my goals. So the DR is 10 plus whatever the minimum magical arts level that you need to cast a spell. So, for example, a level 1 spell, or a spell that you only need to have magical arts level 1 training in to learn, would be a DR 11 if there's to make the spell. So in other words, the DR is the target number, the number that you need to hit with your magical arts roll in order to manifest the spell correctly. And that's kind of a SK term we've chosen to use. Is like the reason I say that is because if you fail your spell casting roll, say for example you are casting this really low, this very simple spell of DR 11, and you roll a 9, we'll say, and the spell fails. So it's not like the spell didn't actually happen. It's just energy happened, but it didn't manifest the way the spell was supposed to, like the intent. And the reason that might be a big deal is because if you critically fail, something happens to you. Meaning that even if you critically fail the spell, obviously something happened. Some kind of energy came out because it affects you on a critical failure. Like you could have your hands could be burnt from a fire spell, or you could be stunned from a powerful mind spell, or sickened for a few hours if you were using like a conjure poison spell, something like that. So that's kind of important, not only for kind of storytelling, world building, but there is a little bit of a mechanical thing behind that. So, and it's fine to totally describe the spell. Oh, the spell doesn't work, or it fizzles, as people like to say. But just know that it something probably happened. Speaking of which, it does call stamina is the derived trait that supplies fuel for magical arts. It also supplies fuel for certain combat maneuvers. Even a few social and maybe even a blood talent or two might cost stamina to use. And then a lot of real world things cost stamina too, like sprinting for a long time costs a stamina point, or rowing a boat for, I think it's every half hour is a stamina point. So yeah, and it's all in the rules. It has a nice little chart about how much stamina you're burning when you do some of this. But for the most part, a normal travel day, you're not really burning any stamina unless you're casting a spell or doing a combat maneuver that requires it, something like that. So all that to say that stamina is kind of the fuel, it's kind of the spell casting stat, so to speak. And the stamina cost of a spell is anywhere from 1 to 10. And again, this is streamlined into the magical arts level of the spell. So going back to our example of the minimum magical arts level 1 spell, it would cost 1 stamina. A level 5 spell that requires minimum level magical arts level 5 to know would cost 5 stamina points. So if the spell fails, going back to what I just said, the spell fails to manifest correctly, in other words, or it fails to work the way you wanted it, the way it's supposed to be in the book, the stamina cost is only half. So it now is only half. So let's go back to what I was talking about. So that shows that some energy came forth, right? Because you spent some stamina, so there was some effort in there, but not to the full effect. So that's why you're only using half stamina. And it rounds down. For example, with our level 5 example, if the spell fails, you only spend 2 stamina points, and if it succeeded, it was 5. And this goes all the way up to like the legendary level 10 spells, which may be only 3 or 4 NPCs in the entire setting, even though like level 10 spells. But there are such a thing. And going back a little bit, I kind of skipped over this. Going back to the 7 disciplines of magic: air, earth, fire, water, life, death, and shadow. The 4 elemental disciplines that I kind of talked about, air, earth, fire, and water, those all run off of your willpower stat. So there's 3 attributes that actually govern the magical arts. So air, earth, fire, and water is governed by willpower, because you need this kind of force of will to kind of conjure and channel this kind of evocative elemental energy. And then life and death is governed by vigor, because that's how healthy you are. You're channeling literally like life and death energies through your body. I also feel like in my mind, a healthier person I feel like they would be a little bit better at life magic, and maybe some crone sort of tainted person might be better at death or something. But anyway, they both run off of vigor, and I kind of like the fact that there's a dichotomy, but also a relationship between life and death. So as you can see, they run off of vigor, and they're supposed to be kind of a yin and yang. They're related more than they want to think, but they're yet opposites at the same time, if that makes any sense. And then we have our outlier. Our 7th discipline is shadow. Shadow magic is actually governed by intellect. The reason for that, in my mind, it kind of goes back to almost like earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons when the illusionist subclass came out, and it was I remember one of the prerequisites, one of the ability score prerequisites to be illusionist was like intelligence 15 or something, 13, I don't know. That kind of stuck in my head. It's like, and I kind of see why, because I feel like someone who's weaving illusions and mind magic, because shadow magic in SK and Savage Kingdoms is mind, divination, and literal light and darkness magic. And I feel like that would take a little bit of some smarts and some cunning and cleverness. So there you go. That's the 3 attributes that govern the 7 different magical arts. Just going back a little bit. All right, where did I leave up? Going forward, I talked about the DR's difficulty ratings running from 11 to 20. Speaking of which, I guess so. Most player characters that start off with a magical arts skill usually have anywhere from a +2 to maybe a +4, possibly a +5 modifier I've seen starting with. And if you start, and it's hard to start with a skill specialty, because specialties in the new edition of Savage Kingdoms are a +2 bonus now, as opposed to a +1 bonus in previous editions. So they pack a little bit more punch. And again, that's a design choice. So starting off, you're not going to have a massive +7, +8 to shadow or magic or fire magic or whatever it is that you're delving into, if not both. But fairly quickly, if you put when you advance and you put skill points into these, you can get up there. By the time you're learning, say, like 4th level spells, I mean you're looking at your bonuses being +7, maybe +8. And you might have a specialty at that point, which can be a spell. So maybe in that one spell, you might be +9 in. So that's pretty cool. I think it's good without being too ridiculous. So yeah, just wanted to point that out. So in case you're thinking like, well, what does the DR mean if we don't really know what the bonuses are? So right. So it's all base 0, kind of like in Dungeons & Dragons, base 10 and base 0. In other words, what I mean by that is a bonus is +0 is kind of your baseline, right? Somebody that's unskilled and has this kind of an average attribute in whatever that skill is, which represents raw talent, right? Whereas going back to our level 4 example, that person, someone, a magician is able to cast level 4 spells. Those are considered adept. at the high end of depth, you're almost like 5th level spells in 6, you're considered an expert. And then you start hitting mastery at like 7th and 8th, and then grand mastery is 9th and 10th level spells. So just to kind of throw that out there and kind of see where I'm coming from with that. Spellcasting, also in combat, I probably mentioned this in the last video, it costs 2 actions to cast a spell in combat, which works really great. So imagine that's like 4 seconds roughly, which is impressive because most NPCs in the setting are using ritual magic for the most part. I mean, it's not like, obviously there's a few battlefield mages, NPCs, or maybe even a temple priest who might want to have to cast a spell like really quick, doesn't have an hour. So some of those people, it is getting done by non-adventuring player characters as well. But for the most part, in the background of the world with the NPCs, they're using ritual magic. They have the time. It costs an hour to cast a spell as a ritual. You can technically cast any spell that you know as a ritual. You don't have to have a special talent for it. There is a talent called Ritual Master, though, that gives you something else. But anybody can cast a spell as a ritual. Anybody can also sense magic or detect magic just by force of will. You will only be able to sense the type of magic that you know. Like if you're skilled in water magic, and you say that you want to like sense magic it's just within a 5-yard area, by the way. You would only be able to pick up anything that's water-based magic, not anything else. That's also a change from previous editions. And that's not necessarily to nerf, so to speak, that ability, but it's more for clarification. It was a little confusing in the past. I noticed a lot of players seem to assume that you would only be able to sense the type of magic that you know, where my design choice was that it was anything. So I kind of felt like their intuitive thought process was more accurate. It also makes the magical disciplines a little bit more thematic. So that's why we're doing it that way. So cool. Yeah, and so, but speaking of which, when you sense or detect magic, if you touch the item, it doesn't cost you any stamina points. If you do it at range, 5 yards, it costs a stamina point. And the reason why it doesn't cost one because you're touching it, I figure in my brain that means it takes less energy, but also you're taking a chance of touching like a cursed object or an object that's magically trapped or something like that. So I figure that's kind of the payoff or the trade-off. So anyway, going back to combat, yeah, 2 actions it costs. There is a talent called Swift Magic. I think you can learn it as early as like being able to cast 5th level spells, I believe, or magical arts level 5, maybe 4. And that allows you to cast a spell as 1 action. It does cost 2 extra stamina points though, which kind of makes sense because you're rushing the spell within like 2 seconds, and you're cramming a lot of power and energy into this one moment. That's going to cost you some extra stamina. But it is possible, and there you go. And then you would have 2 actions left over to do other stuff. Speaking of which, you can only cast a spell once per turn, per your 6-second turn. Unless you extend that turn to an additional action. Say if you spend a luck point to gain an extra action, you could therefore cast a second spell in your turn, which is pretty kind of awesome. Another way you gain an extra action is if you critically succeed initiative, you gain 4 actions for the opening round of combat or whatever action scene that is, and that would allow you to also possibly cast 2 spells if you really wanted to, or at least try to. So very cool. Yeah, so rituals take an hour. Like I said, they give you a +4 bonus to the magical arts roll, which is pretty huge, especially because it's at SK. A lot of the spells go right off. The higher you succeed, give you extra things, right? Extra things can happen all the way up to critical successes. So that's kind of important. And that was another design goal with Savage Kingdoms. I didn't want to throw away numbers that much. It mostly comes from combat. I got a little tired of that in D&D where you would roll, say, a 24, and the opponent's armor class is only like 12, and you rolled like 12 over. It didn't really matter because now you're rolling damage dice, and maybe you only rolled 1 point of damage. So there's a temptation of describing like, oh, you just drill this opponent because they rolled like 12 or 13 over. And then there's a disconnect because now there's a damage die that has nothing to do with the 2 hit die. So yeah, so that's what I did with the not just combat in Savage Kingdoms, but the whole thing. So magical arts as well. So the higher the number, in most cases, there's a few spells that doesn't matter unless you score critical success. It doesn't matter as much that you rolled high, but for the most part, you're rolling high to either set the DR for the opponent's resistance roll. A resistance roll is basically like a saving throw. And usually that's endurance or resolve, and sometimes it's acrobatics to dodge out of the way. So, for example, if you cast a spell and you roll like a 23, get a result of 23, there are certain spells that means that that opponent has to score a 23 or better on whatever resistance roll there is, if if it is a spell requiring one. So that makes the spell very powerful, packs a lot of punch. On the opposite end, you might roll an 11 or 12 and the spell barely works, and now they only have to roll an 11 or 12 to resist it. So yeah, very cool. I like the fact that the power of a spell can fluctuate, and it's not always the same like DC like it is in D&D or something like that. Also, ritual magic allows you not to automatically critical fail. So I'll take that back. So another drawback to casting quick magic or spontaneous magic or combat magic is that if you roll a natural 1, you automatically critically fail. It's the only skill or the only element in Savage Kingdoms where you automatically critically fail with a natural 1 is spellcasting, not doing it ritualistically. And the reason for that is I wanted it to be a little more dangerous, a little bit more somewhat chaotic without being too ridiculous, and to get everybody a sense that because this has been a thing in SK for a while, but I don't feel like it often is like really reverberated with people. I want people to know that this is very much a sword and sorcery setting, and sorcery, hence the term, and the more traditional sense of the term, can be very deadly and dangerous, and it's very unnatural that mortals are using it really in the first place in many cases. So there needs to be some edge to it. But some of the critical failures, even though they can be kind of nasty, they're very entertaining. Some of them are pretty like, holy moly, that happened. That's cool. So some good storytelling stuff, which is really the whole point, right? So anyway, if you do a ritual spell, you do not automatically critically fail in a natural 1. In fact, you probably will never critically fail, because normal critical failures, if you roll a natural 1 and the total result is 10 less than the DR of what you were doing, that's a critical failure. So if you're getting a +4 bonus from from doing a ritual in the first place, the odds of crit failing, even with a natural 1, are really slim, unless you're fatigued while you're casting the spell and staggered, you have some conditions on you that have several negatives. That might be the only way that you might critical fail as a ritual. So in other words, another advantage for ritual magic if you have the time. All right, so I'll close out with a few other things. So I did mention a few talents that help augment spellcasting. I just want to kind of go over a few of those. So I went over Swift Magic, and there's a lot of them. I didn't even write down all of them, nor do I have them necessarily already off the top of my head to mention. But there's a good 24. Well, in total, there's 35 mystical talents. That's the category that most of the talents that would augment spellcasting are from. So not all of them are like direct correlation. Like there's a seer talent or second sight, which is you were born with the gift to kind of predict the future and see things. It's not even necessarily a spell. That's why it's called the mystical category. Or snake charmer is like a skill that's it's really mostly a social skill and animal handling skill, but there's a little bit of a mystical element to it, stuff like that. But there are at least half the talents in the mystical category are augmentation talents for spellcasting. For example, far-reaching magic allows you to double the range of the spell that you're casting for, I think it's 1 extra stamina, it might be 2 extra stamina points. So that's pretty big. Say if the range of the spell you're casting is only 10 yards, you can double that to 20, or if it's 20, double it to 40, etc. Swift Magic, whenever it allows you to cast a spell as 1 action, although it costs you 2 extra stamina points. There's another one that doubles the range or the area of effect of the spell. expansive. That's what it's called. Expansive magic, because it expands, right? So if it's a spell that's normally affects only a 2 by 2 yard area, if you have that talent and are using it in that moment, and it does cost an extra stamina or 2, I think it's 2, you can expand it to 4 by 4 yards in that example. Or if it's a normal 3 by 3, it goes to 6 by 6 yard, yard area. And then some of the really higher level spells have a pretty massive area effect, and if you're augmenting, yeah. So it can be pretty epic and cool, I think. And there's a couple other talents, like energetic, I think is what I called it, or maybe it was called, it might be empowering spell. I don't know. Anyway, there is a talent where you can pump a few more extra stamina points into it to give it a little more zing, like a +2 bonus to your magical arts roll. Yes, steady spell does that if you spend an extra action. So in other words, if you spend 3 actions casting a spell instead of just 2, which means that all you can do is just cast a spell, you can't even move for that round, you get a +2 additional bonus because you're kind of taking your time with it. That's why it's called steady spell or steady magic. There's another talent called Evil Eye, where if you make eye contact with an opponent, I think it's only shadow spells, because those are mostly mind attack spells. You spend an action making eye contact with your opponent within 5 yards or 10 yards. Then you can follow it with another +2 bonus to the magical arts roll. And stuff like that. Song magic is really cool. I don't think you can start with it. I think you have to have at least level 3 magical arts, and you have to have at least a level or 2 in performance, I believe. But you can cast spells by song magic, and this has long been kind of supported by particularly the bard class in D&D. But it's never been hard coded. It's just been people have always like just described, oh, I'm singing my spell, and that's great. But this actually is a hard coded game mechanic. So it allows you to add your skill levels of performance into your magical arts roll, which is really cool. If you sing the spell, obviously the player doesn't actually have to sing it, but yeah, and you can use a musical instrument instead of speaking, but it costs an extra action. So that's kind of cool. There's different other things as well, but I won't bog it down. But just let you know, there's other augmentative talents that will affect your spellcasting if you choose to play such in Savage Kingdoms 4th edition. All right, I think it's going to do it. Thanks for hanging in there. I'm going to try to do more videos as much as possible. I think. I mean, again, it's not really getting a ton of views, but those of you who are watching, I do appreciate it. Hopefully, you made it this far in the video. Like and subscribe and share and all that stuff. Check out Savage Kingdoms, the new edition, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Thank you.